I watched them through the bay window, laughing as they unloaded her designer suitcases from his Mercedes. My husband Daniel and the woman he'd been seeing for the past 6 months, Vanessa, his executive assistant. They looked so carefree, so comfortable in my driveway, beside my carefully cultivated hydrangeas, approaching the front door of my house. A house that, as far as Daniel knew, was ours. I sipped my tea slowly from the window seat of the coffee shop across the street, the perfect vantage point for this bizarre spectacle. 3 weeks ago, I'd moved out without a word, not a single text or note. I'd simply vanished, taking only what I could fit in 2 suitcases, leaving everything else behind. My personal documents, my grandmother's jewelry, and most importantly, the deed to the house safely transferred to a lockbox only I could access. Daniel hadn't bothered to file a missing person report. Not that I expected him to. Our marriage had been unraveling for years, held together by dinner parties, joint investments, and the persistent illusion of success. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly he'd move his girlfriend in once I disappeared. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Another tea, Ms. Keller? The barista appeared beside me, coffee pot in hand. Claire, please, I reminded her with a small smile. And yes, that would be lovely. From my perch by the window, I had a perfect view as Daniel fumbled with his house key, Vanessa pressing herself against his back, her lips on his neck. They were practically giddy. The house was empty, the wife was gone, and now they could play house together in a $2.3 million Victorian in the most prestigious neighborhood in town. If only Daniel had paid more attention to the paperwork when we'd purchased it 5 years ago. If only he'd noticed that the deed was solely in my name. A protective measure I'd insisted upon after watching my mother lose everything in her own divorce. Daniel had been too preoccupied with impressing our realtor with market predictions to bother with such minor details. My phone vibrated with a text from my lawyer, Meredith. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow, 10 a.m. All documents ready. Are you certain you want to proceed this way? I typed back quickly. Absolutely. Let them enjoy the weekend first. My gaze returned to the house just as they disappeared inside, the front door closing behind them. I could picture it perfectly, Vanessa's wide eyes taking in the crown moldings, the marble foyer, the grand staircase. Daniel playing tour guide, probably embellishing about the vision he'd had for the renovations, conveniently forgetting it was my inheritance that had paid for them. I glanced at my watch. By now, they'd have discovered that most of my belongings were still there. My clothes still hung in the closet, my books still lined the shelves, my perfumes still arranged on the vanity, an abandoned life, preserved like a museum exhibit. Daniel would be confused but relieved, assuming I'd left in a hurry and would eventually come crawling back. He didn't understand that I'd left those things behind not out of haste, but calculation. Everything in that house had been inventoried, photographed, and legally documented by my team. Every item would become evidence of what was about to unfold. The barista, Jenny according to her name tag, refilled my cup and gave me a curious look. You've been watching that house for a while. Friend of yours live there? I took a sip before answering. Actually, I do. Or did. It's complicated. Jenny's eyebrows raised slightly. Sounds like there's a story there. There is, I conceded, but it's still being written. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'd met Daniel 12 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the hospital where I worked as chief financial officer. He was charming, ambitious, handsome in that manufactured way that speaks of careful grooming and expensive haircuts. As the newest junior partner at Preston and Blackwell Investment Group, he was eager to impress, dropping names and figures with practiced ease. I was impressed, but not for the reasons he thought. Behind his smooth veneer, I recognized something familiar. The same desperate hunger for success that had driven me from my small-town beginnings to the executive suite. The same determination to never look back, to climb higher, to prove something to the world. We were married within a year, a perfect merger of ambition and assets. For a while, it worked beautifully. We renovated the Victorian, hosted the right parties, joined the right clubs, made the right investments. Daniel's career flourished, and he eventually made senior partner. I orchestrated our financial portfolio with the same precision I brought to the hospital's books, quietly building a safety net that Daniel rarely questioned. It was during the 7th year of our marriage that the first cracks appeared. Daniel started coming home later, his explanations about client meetings growing vaguer. The cologne he wore changed subtly. His phone became a closely guarded possession. Classic signs, so predictable they were almost insulting. I hired a private investigator not out of jealousy or even surprise, but out of a practical need to assess the situation. The reports confirmed what I'd suspected: dinner meetings that extended to nightcaps at hotel bars, weekend conferences that involved only minimal attendance at actual conference events. Still, I held my cards close. Confrontation wasn't my style. It only gave the other person an opportunity to prepare their defenses. Instead, I started making preparations of my own. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah, my best friend and the hospital's legal counsel. "How's the surveillance going? Need backup?" I replied, "All clear for now." They're inside. "Dinner tonight?" Sarah had been my confidant throughout this entire process. She'd helped me prepare for the long game, setting up the network of professionals I'd need: forensic accountants, investigators, specialized attorneys. She understood why I couldn't just walk away or confront Daniel directly. Some betrayals required a more sophisticated response. Across the street, an upstairs light flickered on. The master bedroom. I could imagine Vanessa exploring, running her hands over my Egyptian cotton sheets, opening my closets, perhaps wondering if she should suggest to Daniel that they clear out my things. After all, I'd been gone for 3 weeks without a word. Surely I wasn't coming back. What they didn't know was that I'd been watching the house all this time, documenting their comings and goings. I had footage of the first night Vanessa had stayed over, just 3 days after my disappearance. I had recordings of them bringing in groceries, wine, takeout. I had time-stamped photos of them kissing in the driveway, entering and leaving together at hours that made it clear she wasn't just visiting. All evidence of abandonment of the marital property, of disrespect for the marriage even before any formal separation. Evidence that would prove valuable very soon. The real twist came 6 months ago, when Daniel was passed over for managing partner. The position went to Eliza Chambers, a brilliant strategist with an impeccable track record. Daniel had been furious, convinced he'd been robbed of what was rightfully his. He began spending recklessly: a new car, custom suits, lavish gifts for himself. And, as I would later discover, for Vanessa. Unknown to Daniel, I'd been tracking our finances meticulously. I watched as our joint accounts dwindled while my separate accounts, the ones he didn't know about, remained untouched. I observed as he made increasingly risky investments, trying to prove himself worthy of the position he'd lost. And I said nothing, allowing him to believe I was still the supportive, somewhat naive wife who trusted his financial acumen implicitly. What Daniel failed to realize was that I'd been the financial backbone of our marriage from the beginning. My salary had always been higher, my investments more conservative but ultimately more profitable. The down payment for our house had come from my savings, the renovations from my inheritance when my grandmother passed away. I'd kept these details subtle, knowing how important it was for Daniel to believe he was the primary provider. My phone lit up with another text from Sarah. "Just got off the phone with Marcus. He says Daniel's investment group is underwater, several major clients pulling out after that PR disaster." I knew all about the PR disaster. Preston and Blackwell had been caught in a scheme involving inflated returns and misappropriated funds. Daniel wasn't directly implicated, but the stain spread to everyone at the firm. Their stock was plummeting, clients were fleeing, and Daniel's own investments, tied closely to the firm's performance, were in free fall, which explained his increasingly desperate moves. I'd noticed large withdrawals from our joint savings account, money being moved into high-risk ventures. Daniel was trying to gamble his way out of trouble, unaware that I'd already protected the bulk of our assets. I finished my tea and left a generous tip for Jenny. It was time to move to the next phase of my plan. As I walked to my car, not the luxury SUV Daniel knew, but a modest sedan I'd purchased through a shell company months ago, I took one last look at the house. Our house. My house. Tomorrow, Daniel and Vanessa would leave for what they thought would be a romantic weekend at his family's lake house. They'd return on Sunday evening to find the locks changed, a security system they couldn't disarm, and legal notices plastered to the door. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, I had dinner with Sarah, followed by final preparations with my legal team. The endgame was approaching, and timing was everything. At the upscale restaurant where Sarah waited, I checked my reflection in the window, composed, confident, not a hair out of place. Nothing in my appearance suggested a woman whose marriage was imploding. Nothing revealed the calculated fury beneath my carefully maintained facade. "You look terrifyingly calm," Sarah observed as I slid into the booth across from her. "I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned." "Be impressed," I said, accepting the glass of Cabernet she'd already ordered for me. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And you're certain the house is legally yours? No loopholes he could exploit?" "Absolutely certain. The deed is in my name only. I paid the down payment from my separate account. I handled all the property taxes through my personal accounts. Daniel's name doesn't appear on a single document related to ownership." "And he never questioned this arrangement?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Daniel has always been more interested in appearances than details. As long as he could boast about our house at dinner parties, he never bothered to verify whose name was actually on the deed." Sarah shook her head, both amused and appalled. "Men like Daniel never see women like you coming, do they?" "That's what makes this possible," I replied, studying the menu though I already knew what I would order. "He underestimated me from the beginning, first as an asset, then as an opponent." The conversation paused as our server approached. We ordered, maintaining the appearance of two friends enjoying a casual dinner. Once we were alone again, Sarah pulled out her tablet, switching to business mode. "I've reviewed all the documentation from the forensic accountants," she said. "Daniel has been systematically moving money from your joint accounts into private ones for the past 8 months. Some of it was used for gifts for Vanessa, jewelry, weekend getaways, that sort of thing. But the bulk appears to be an attempt to shield assets in anticipation of a potential divorce." I nodded, unsurprised. "Which plays perfectly into our hands. Hiding marital assets is frowned upon by divorce courts." "There's more," Sarah continued, her expression grim. "He's been lying about the firm's stability. Preston and Blackwell is under federal investigation. Rumors of indictments coming within weeks. Daniel's position is particularly vulnerable." This was new information, but it didn't change my strategy. If anything, it accelerated my timeline. Daniel would be even more desperate now, more likely to make mistakes. "Do you think he moved Vanessa in so quickly because he's about to lose everything?" Sarah asked. "Setting up a backup plan?" I considered this, taking a measured sip of wine. Possibly. Or perhaps he truly believes I'll never come back. Either way, it demonstrates his character, or lack thereof. Our food arrived and we ate, with the efficiency of two professionals accustomed to working lunches and strategic dinners. Between bites, we finalized details for the coming week. The locksmith scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, the the security team on standby, the formal notices, prepared by Meredith. "What about your personal items still in the house?" Sarah asked, signaling for the check. "Aren't you worried about what might happen to them?" "Everything of true value, financially or sentimentally, is already secured," I assured her. "What remains is either replaceable or strategically left behind. Besides, we have detailed inventory and photographic evidence of everything in that house. If a single item goes missing, it becomes another point in our favor." Sarah studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had years to prepare," I replied simply. Later that night, in my temporary apartment, a sleek, minimalist space in a secure building downtown, I reviewed the final preparations for tomorrow. The locksmith was confirmed for 2 p.m. when surveillance confirmed Daniel and Vanessa would be well on their way to the lake house. The security team would arrive at 2:30 to install the new system and remain on site until Sunday evening. Meredith would deliver the legal notices at 3 p.m., ensuring everything was properly documented. I opened my laptop and checked the tracking app I'd installed on Daniel's phone months ago, another piece of insurance I'd never expected to need. The dot showed him at our house, my house, presumably settling in for the night with Vanessa. Tomorrow morning, they'd pack for their weekend getaway, blissfully unaware of what awaited them upon their return. As I prepared for bed, I felt no sadness, no regret, not even anger anymore. Those emotions had burned away months ago, leaving only cool determination in their place. Daniel had made his choices. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. My phone buzzed with a final text from Meredith. "Everything in place for tomorrow. Last chance to reconsider approach. More conventional options still available." I typed my response without hesitation. "Proceed as planned. They deserve the weekend of false security before reality hits." Setting my phone aside, I slipped between cool sheets and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the end for Daniel's comfortable illusions. By this time next week, he would understand exactly who he had betrayed, not the compliant, supportive wife he thought he knew, but a woman who had anticipated his every move and prepared accordingly, a woman who owned the very ground beneath his feet and was about to reclaim it. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched my state of mind. I rose early, completed my usual fitness routine, and dressed with particular care. A sleek charcoal suit that projected authority, pearls that had been my grandmother's, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than concealed. Today wasn't about confrontation. Daniel and Vanessa would be long gone before any of my team arrived at the house. Today was about preparation, about setting the stage for Sunday's revelation. My phone buzzed with a text from my surveillance contact. "Subjects loading car now. Estimated departure within 30 minutes. Perfect timing." I gathered my essentials and headed out, not to the house but to Meredith's office for our final briefing. As I drove, I allowed myself to picture Daniel and Vanessa's faces when they returned from their romantic weekend to find themselves locked out of my home. Legal notices demanding their immediate and permanent departure. The thought brought a small, satisfied smile to my face as I merged onto the highway, heading toward the next chapter of my carefully orchestrated plan. Meredith's office occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, all steel, glass, and intimidating professionalism. The reception area of Harper, Chen & Associates featured sleek furnishings, strategic lighting, and not a single family photo or personal touch. This wasn't a place that specialized in amicable divorces or friendly separations. This was where you came when you needed legal warfare conducted with surgical precision. "Claire," Meredith greeted me, emerging from her corner office exactly on time. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but restrained. At 52, Meredith Harper had built her reputation as the most feared divorce attorney in 3 counties. She specialized in cases where one spouse had significantly wronged the other, Infidelity, financial deception, abandonment. Judges respected her, opposing counsel feared her, and clients like me valued her ruthless efficiency. Confirmation. "Just came through," she said as she led me into her office. "Your husband and his companion departed the residence approximately 12 minutes ago. Our surveillance indicates they're headed toward the lake house as expected." I nodded, unsurprised. Daniel was nothing if not predictable, a quality that had once been comforting but had ultimately made this entire process almost too easy. Locksmith is scheduled for 2 o'clock, Meredith continued, consulting her tablet as we sat at her conference table. "Security team at 2:30, and I'll personally deliver the notices at 3. She glanced up. "You're certain you don't want to be present?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. "My presence would only create an opportunity for confrontation. Better to let the legal documents speak for themselves." Meredith nodded approvingly. She appreciated clients who understood strategy over emotion. "Now, let's review the documentation once more." She spread several folders across the table, each labeled with meticulous precision: property deed, financial evidence, infidelity documentation, abandonment of marital property. For the next hour, we methodically went through each folder, ensuring every document was properly prepared, every photograph dated and authenticated, every financial record verified. The case we were building wasn't just about reclaiming my house. It was about ensuring Daniel couldn't contest any aspect of the divorce settlement I would eventually offer. "The judge assigned to your case is Crawford," Meredith noted, making a small annotation on her legal pad. "She has little patience for infidelity, and even less for financial deception. The evidence of Daniel moving his girlfriend into the marital home so quickly after your disappearance, without filing any missing person report, will not go over well." "And the Denton file?" I asked, referring to the discreet investigation we'd commissioned into Preston and Blackwell's financial troubles. Meredith slid another folder across the table. "Fresh this morning. The SEC investigation is accelerating. 3 senior partners have already received target letters. Daniel isn't among them yet, but his department is under particular scrutiny." I scanned the report, noting the projected timeline. For potential indictments, the specific transactions being investigated, the clients who had already withdrawn their investments. Daniel's professional world was collapsing around him, and he had no idea I knew. "How much time does he have before this becomes public?" I asked. 2 weeks, 3 at most," Meredith replied. "When it breaks, the firm's stock will plummet further. Any investments tied to their funds will be essentially worthless." I closed the folder, a new piece slotting into my understanding of Daniel's recent behavior. "That explains the sudden liquidation of our joint investments last month. He's trying to get ahead of the crash. Moving assets before a divorce filing is problematic enough," Meredith said. "Moving them while aware of pending federal securities charges is considerably worse. Our forensic accountant has tracked 3 separate transfers to offshore accounts in the past 6 weeks. Can we prove Daniel knew about the investigation before making those transfers?" Meredith's smile was small but satisfied. "His personal email to Vanessa from February 12th. I quote, 'The SEC is sniffing around Fletcher's division. Need to move quickly before this blows up.'" I raised an eyebrow. "You have access to his personal emails?" "Let's just say Vanessa's cloud. Storage security is significantly less robust than it should be for someone with access to potentially sensitive financial information," Meredith replied with professional detachment. "Also, she really should know better than to use her work computer for personal communications." By noon, we had finalized all preparations. The locksmith and security team were confirmed, the legal notices prepared and notarized, and a detailed inventory of all items in the house updated one final time. "What happens when they return on Sunday and find themselves locked out?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They'll call you, obviously," Meredith replied. "When that fails, they'll likely call a locksmith themselves, at which point they'll discover the new security system and the legal notices. The notices clearly state that any attempt to enter the property without your express permission will constitute trespassing. Given that the deed is solely in your name and Daniel has been documented moving another woman into the property, his legal standing is extremely shaky. He'll be furious, I noted without particular concern. Undoubtedly. But fury doesn't change legal reality. Meredith gathered the folders, returning them to her secure cabinet. We've arranged for a security detail to monitor the property Sunday, evening through Monday morning, just in case he decides to test the boundaries. As our meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from the surveillance team. Subjects arrived at Lake House 11:42 a.m. All clear at primary residence. Everything's on schedule, I informed Meredith. They've reached the lake house. She nodded, walking me to her office door. I'll call you when everything's completed this afternoon. In the meantime, I suggest you proceed with your day as planned. Best to establish normal patterns of behavior. My normal pattern for today included a scheduled lunch with the hospital, board chairman, followed by a meeting with the underwriters for our new expansion project. Everyone at work believed I was in the midst of a trial separation, a simplified version of the truth that explained my temporary change of address without inviting unwanted questions or pity. As I left Meredith's building, I felt strangely light, as though I'd set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. In many ways I had. The weight of Daniel's deception, my silent knowledge of his betrayal, the careful maintenance of our facade of marital harmony. All of it was finally being shed, replaced by the clean, clear lines of legal procedure and financial disentanglement. My phone buzzed again as I reached my car. This time it was Sarah. Lunch still on for 1:30? Have updates on Dee's workplace situation. I texted back a quick confirmation. Sarah's position as the hospital's legal counsel gave her access to information networks that complemented my own. Her updates were always valuable. The restaurant Sarah had chosen was deliberately casual, a farm-to-table cafe tucked between a bookstore and a boutique florist in the city's arts district. Not the kind of place Daniel or any of his colleagues would frequent, which made it perfect for our purposes. Sarah was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, her typical court attire exchanged for weekend casual, though even her casual maintained an elegance that spoke of careful curation. You look suspiciously serene for someone in the middle of dismantling her marriage, she observed as I sat down. I prefer to think of it as reorganizing my life, I replied, accepting the menu from our server. Once we'd ordered, Sarah leaned forward, her voice lowered. So, Richards, you know my contact in the Financial Crimes Division, called this morning. The Preston and Blackwell investigation has expanded. They're looking at potential RICO charges now. I set down my water glass carefully. Racketeering? That's more serious than we thought. Apparently, some of the senior partners were running what amounts to a Ponzi scheme for certain high-value clients. The house of cards is collapsing spectacularly. Sarah's expression was grim. Daniel's department was handling some of these special accounts. Even if he wasn't directly involved in creating the scheme, he had to have known something wasn't right. This complicated matters, potentially for the better, from my perspective. If Daniel faced criminal charges, his ability to contest our divorce or make claims on my assets would be severely compromised. Timeline? I asked. Grand jury convenes next week, indictments likely within the month. Our food arrived momentarily, pausing the conversation. As we ate, I considered the implications of this new information. Daniel was not just facing a divorce and the loss of his home. He was potentially looking at criminal charges, professional disgrace, and financial ruin. A normal person might feel some sympathy, some residual concern for a man they'd spent 12 years married to. I searched my heart and found none. Daniel had made his choices, professional and personal, with a cavalier disregard for consequences. Now those consequences were arriving, and I felt no obligation to shield him from them. Any word about Vanessa's involvement? I asked, spearing, a forkful of salad. Sarah shook her head. As far as we know, she's just the executive assistant who became the girlfriend. No indication she's involved in the financial issues, although… She hesitated. Although what? Richards mentioned something interesting. Apparently, Vanessa was previously employed at Meridian Capital, another firm that came under SEC investigation 3 years ago. She left just before the scandal broke. Coincidence, maybe. I filed this information away for future reference. Whether Vanessa was merely attracted to powerful, corrupt men or actually involved in their schemes was unclear. Either way, she'd hitched her wagon to the wrong horse this time. What time is the locksmith arriving? Sarah asked, changing the subject. 2:00. Everything should be completed by 4. Sarah studied me over her iced tea. And you're really just going to let them return to a locked house with no warning? No conversation? What conversation would you suggest? I countered. Hello, Daniel. Just wanted to let you know that the house you moved your girlfriend into is actually mine, and I'd like you both to leave immediately. When you put it that way, Sarah conceded with a small smile. Besides, I continued, this approach sends a clearer message. Daniel needs to understand that I've been 3 steps ahead of him this entire time, that every move he thought was so clever was anticipated and countered before he even made it. Remind me never to cross you, Sarah said, only half joking. After lunch, I drove to my temporary apartment to prepare for the afternoon's operations. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I received confirmation that the locksmith was en route to the house. At 2:10, the first photos arrived on my secure server, close-ups of the new deadbolts being installed, the old keys rendered useless. By 2:40, the security team had arrived and begun installation of the new system, one that required both a code and biometric confirmation for entry. My fingerprints and retinal scan were already programmed as the only authorized access points. At 3:05, Meredith texted, "Notices posted on all entries. Copies sent electronically to Dee's email and delivered physically to his office. Security confirms. Installation complete. Property secured." I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was done. My house was reclaimed, legally and physically. Now came the waiting game. To occupy myself during this interlude, I focused on practical matters, reviewing the hospital's quarterly financial projections, preparing notes for Monday's budget meeting, answering work emails that had accumulated over the past few days. I deliberately avoided checking the surveillance feeds from the house or Daniel's location. There was nothing more to see until Sunday evening. That night, I treated myself to a rare indulgence, ordering in from my favorite sushi restaurant, opening a bottle of exceptional sake I'd been saving, and watching a film I'd been wanting to see. Small celebrations for small victories. The true confrontation was still to come. Sunday arrived with unexpected serenity. I spent the morning at a yoga class, followed by brunch with an old college friend who knew nothing of my marital situation. The normalcy was refreshing, a reminder that life continued beyond the drama currently unfolding in my personal sphere. By late afternoon, however, my focus had shifted back to the impending confrontation. According to the tracking data, Daniel and Vanessa had left the lake house at 3:17 p.m. Their typical drive time would put them back at the house between 5:30 and 6 p.m. At 5:15, I received confirmation that the security team was in position, unmarked cars at strategic points with clear views of all entrances to the property. Their instructions were clear: observe and document, but intervene only if there was an attempt to forcibly enter the house or if the situation escalated to potential violence. At 5:42, the notification I'd been waiting for: subject's vehicle approaching neighborhood. ETA to property approximately 3 minutes. I settled into the chair in my home office, iPad propped on the desk, displaying the feeds from the security cameras now positioned around my house. Split screens showed the driveway, front entrance, back, door and side gate, Everything was quiet, peaceful. For now. At 5:46, Daniel's Mercedes turned into the driveway. I watched as he and Vanessa emerged from the car, laughing about something, completely unaware of what awaited them. They unloaded their weekend bags from the trunk, and Daniel led the way to the front door. The first hint of trouble came when his key failed to turn in the lock. I observed his confusion, the repeated attempts, the growing frustration. Vanessa said something, gesturing at the door. Daniel tried again, more forcefully this time. Finally, he stepped back, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. Vanessa pointed to something, the legal notice prominently affixed to the door. Daniel ripped it off, holding it closer to read in the fading evening light. Even without audio, I could track the progression of his reaction, confusion giving way to disbelief, then anger. He crumpled the notice, threw it to the ground, then pulled out his phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. On cue, my phone began to ring. Daniel's name and photo appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. On the security feed, I watched him leave another furious message, his third in as many minutes. Vanessa was on her phone too, perhaps calling a locksmith or researching what to do when locked out of your home. The expected text arrived moments later. What the hell is going on? Why are the locks changed? Call me immediately. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the legal notices hadn't already communicated. Daniel's next move was predictable. He stormed around to the back door, Vanessa trailing behind, only to find it similarly secured with a matching legal notice. His body language conveyed his escalating rage, the tight shoulders, the clenched fists, the aggressive stance. When he returned to the front yard, he was already on his phone again, likely calling a locksmith. I knew exactly how that conversation would go. The security system we'd installed was registered with all local locksmith services. Any legitimate business would refuse the job once they ran the address through their system and saw the legal hold. Sure enough, Daniel's expression confirmed my prediction. Whoever he was speaking to had clearly declined his request. He ended the call with visible anger, then immediately dialed again. Same result, judging by his reaction. Vanessa appeared to be growing uncomfortable, hugging herself as the evening air cooled. She said something to Daniel, who snapped back at her before returning to his futile attempts to contact me. By the 10th call, all sent straight to voicemail, Daniel had progressed to pounding on the front door and shouting. The security team texted an update. Subject becoming volatile. Neighbors taking notice. Security prepared to intervene if necessary. I texted back, hold positions unless property damage occurs or physical threats made. Just as I sent this instruction, Daniel appeared to have a new idea. He returned to his car, rummaged through the trunk, and emerged with what looked like a tire iron. My heart rate increased slightly. Was he actually going to try to break in? Before he could approach the house, however, a police cruiser turned onto the street, slowing as it neared my property. One of the neighbors must have called in a disturbance. Perfect. The officers approached Daniel, who was still holding the tire iron. A brief conversation ensued, during which I could see Daniel gesturing wildly at the house, likely claiming it was his home that he was locked out of. One officer examined the legal notice while the other spoke into his radio, presumably running the address to check property records. The encounter ended exactly as I anticipated. The officers clearly informed Daniel that the property was registered solely in my name, that the legal notices were valid, and that any attempt to enter without permission would constitute criminal trespassing. They instructed him to remove his vehicle from the driveway and leave the premises. Daniel's fury was evident even on the small screen. The red face, the aggressive posturing, the finger pointing. But against uniformed officers with clear property records, his rage was impotent. Eventually, he stormed back to his car, Vanessa hurrying behind him with their weekend bags. As they drove away, I received a final text from the security team. Subjects departing area. Officers remaining to file incident report, all documented. I set down my phone and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, slow breath. Phase 1 complete. My phone buzzed again. Meredith this time. Police report being filed. Officers confirmed. Legal notices properly served. Security staying in position overnight as planned. Well executed, Claire. The last sentence brought an unexpected sense of satisfaction. Yes, it had been well executed. From the meticulous documentation of Daniel's infidelity to the strategic timing of my disappearance, from the careful monitoring of his financial maneuvers to today's reclamation of my property. Every step calculated, every reaction anticipated. I knew what came next. Daniel would regroup, consult attorneys, and attempt to mount a counteroffensive. He would discover that his options were severely limited by the property deed, the evidence of infidelity, the documented financial deceptions, and now the police report regarding his attempt to enter my house with a potential weapon. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that Daniel and Vanessa were scrambling to find accommodations, their romantic weekend shattered, their sense of security demolished. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Daniel, his final attempt, of the evening. You won't get away with this. You have no idea what you're up against. This is my house, too. I smiled faintly at his predictable bluster. How little he knew. How little he had ever known about me, about my capabilities, about the careful groundwork I'd been laying for years. I typed back a single reply, the only communication I would offer him until our lawyers met formally. Check. The property deed. Daniel. You never owned a thing. Then I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of wine, and settled in for a quiet evening alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new strategies to implement. But tonight, I savored this small victory, the first public move in a game that had been silently unfolding for months. Daniel had always underestimated me. By the time this was over, he would never make that mistake again. Morning arrived with the expected deluge. 16 missed calls from Daniel, 28 text messages ranging from threats to pleas to accusations, 3 voicemails that progressively declined in coherence and increased in volume. More importantly, there were updates from Meredith. Daniel had contacted 3 separate law firms overnight. 2 had declined to represent him after preliminary research into the property records. The third, Goldstein and Palmer, known for aggressive litigation regardless of case merit, had scheduled a consultation for 9 a.m. I forwarded this information to Sarah, who responded immediately. G&P has conflicts with 4 hospital board members. 1 call from me and they'll drop him like radioactive waste. I considered this option briefly before declining. Let him waste his money on futile consultations. More evidence of poor judgment. My office voicemail included an angry message from Daniel demanding I call him immediately to sort out this misunderstanding. His corporate email, which I still had access to through backdoor channels, showed frantic messages to colleagues seeking recommendations for real estate attorneys and temporary housing options. Most telling was an exchange with his direct supervisor. Need emergency personal leave today. Family situation requires immediate attention. The response was not what Daniel had likely hoped for. Request noted. Be advised the executive committee is meeting at 10 a.m. regarding department audit findings. Your presence is mandatory. Daniel's world was collapsing on multiple fronts simultaneously, exactly as I had planned. By the end of today, he would be facing not just the loss of his home and marriage, but potentially his career and freedom as well. I dressed with particular care for my own day, selecting a power suit that projected confidence and control. Today I would attend the hospital board meeting where our new expansion project would be finalized, a professional triumph that would secure my position for years to come. As I applied my makeup, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Daniel. had always defined our success as a couple through his achievements, his career advances, his social connections. He had never fully appreciated that my quiet competence, my strategic planning, my financial acumen were the true foundation of everything we had built. Now he would learn that lesson the hard way, as everything he thought was his crumbled beneath. Him and everything that was truly mine remained rock solid. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. Court filing prepared. Ready to proceed on your command. When would you like to serve him? I considered the timeline carefully before responding. Wait until after the Preston and Blackwell announcement. Maximum impact. Meredith's reply was immediate and appreciative. Strategically. Sound. Will prepare accordingly. I slipped my phone into my purse and headed out, ready to face the day, ready to move forward with the next phase of my carefully orchestrated plan. Daniel thought yesterday's locked door was the battle. He had no idea it was merely the opening move in a much larger war, one he had already lost before it even began. The hospital board meeting proceeded exactly as I'd anticipated, unanimous. Approval for the expansion project I'd spent 18 months developing. As chief financial officer, I'd crafted a financing structure that protected the hospital's assets while maximizing growth potential. The chairman's congratulatory handshake and the admiring nods from my fellow executives provided a moment of professional satisfaction that contrasted sharply with the personal chaos I was methodically navigating. Outstanding work, Claire, Dr. Abernathy, the board chairman, said as we exited the conference room. The precision of your financial projections continues to impress us all. Thank you, I replied with a modest smile. It's simply a matter of anticipating variables and planning accordingly. If only he knew how broadly that philosophy extended beyond my professional life. Back in my office, I found 3 more missed calls from Daniel and a text from Meredith. G&P declined representation after consultation. D now attempting to secure Richards & Bowman. Richards & Bowman, a mid-tier firm known for taking cases others rejected. Their reputation was built on aggressive tactics rather than legal brilliance. They'd be expensive and ultimately ineffective, but they might create temporary complications. I forwarded this information to Sarah, who responded almost immediately. R&B represent 2 donors currently negotiating major gifts to our new cancer center. Potential conflict. Want me to make a call? Again, I declined the assistance. Let him proceed. More financial damage, more desperate decisions. My professional mask remained firmly in place as I conducted afternoon meetings, reviewed departmental budgets, and finalized quarterly projections. No one at the hospital would have guessed that I was simultaneously orchestrating the systematic dismantling of my marriage and my husband's carefully constructed facade. At 3:42 p.m., a breaking news alert flashed across my computer screen. Federal authorities raid Preston and Blackwell offices. Attached was aerial footage of dark-suited FBI agents entering the gleaming downtown headquarters where Daniel had built his career. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from Sarah. Happening now. 6 senior partners taken in for questioning. Richard says indictments coming tomorrow. D's department specifically mentioned in warrants. I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds to process this development before responding. Time to accelerate our timeline. Contact Meredith. Events were unfolding. Faster than even I had projected. The federal investigation had moved from quiet inquiry to public action, and Daniel was now caught in a perfect storm. Personal betrayal exposed, professional misconduct under investigation, legal options dwindling, and financial resources under scrutiny. I sent a brief message to Meredith. Move forward with divorce filing tomorrow morning. Maximum media coverage. Her response was equally concise. Documents prepared. 9 a.m. filing for maximum news cycle impact. Coordination with financial. Press arranged. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Daniel would be dealing with the fallout from the federal raid while simultaneously being served with divorce papers outlining his infidelity, financial misconduct, and false claims to property ownership. All while scrambling for new accommodations and legal representation. As the workday ended, I maintained my usual routine, reviewing final emails, organizing my desk for tomorrow, exchanging pleasantries with colleagues as I departed. No one would see anything unusual in my demeanor or schedule. Maintaining normal patterns was crucial to controlling the narrative that would inevitably emerge once news of my divorce filing became public. In my car, I checked the tracking app one final time. Daniel's location showed him still at Preston, and Blackwell's offices, presumably being questioned by federal agents or desperately trying to salvage client relationships. Either way, he was occupying exactly the position I needed him in, distracted, defensive, and diminished. Instead of returning to my temporary apartment, I directed my car toward a different destination. The house. My house. For the first time, since implementing my plan, I would return to reclaim the space that had been temporarily invaded by Daniel and his girlfriend. The security team had been notified of my arrival, and they verified my identity as I approached. The new locks responded to my key, the new security system to my biometric data. Stepping across the threshold felt like reclaiming territory, not just physical space, but the psychological ground that Daniel had attempted to colonize with his betrayal. Inside, the house looked much as I had left it 3 weeks ago, with subtle differences that spoke volumes about the brief occupation. Vanessa's designer coat hung in the entryway closet. A different brand of coffee sat on the kitchen counter. 2 wine glasses remained in the sink from their pre-weekend departure. I moved methodically through the rooms, noting each intrusion, each alteration. In the master bedroom, Vanessa's clothes hung alongside mine in the closet, her designer dresses nudging against my tailored suits as if they belonged there. Her cosmetics cluttered the bathroom vanity I had always kept meticulously organized. Most telling was the nightstand on what had been Daniel's side of the bed. A woman's novel, a pair of reading glasses that weren't mine, a different brand of hand cream than I used. Vanessa hadn't just visited. She had begun establishing permanence, claiming space, settling in. The guest bedroom had been converted to a makeshift office for Daniel. His laptop docking station, dual monitors, and stacks of financial reports arranged with the precision he always insisted on for his workspace. A bottle of his preferred scotch sat half empty on the antique side table that had been my grandmother's. I took photographs of everything, additional evidence for the divorce proceedings should it become necessary. Then I began the process of reclamation. Vanessa's clothes were removed from the closet, folded neatly, and placed in the designer luggage she had left in the corner of the room. Her toiletries were gathered from the bathroom, wrapped in tissue paper, and added to the suitcases. Every trace of her presence was methodically erased, not with anger, but with the same clinical efficiency I brought to hospital budget reviews. Daniel's personal items received similar treatment. Business clothes segregated from casual wear, shoes paired and placed in their original boxes, cufflinks and watches secured in their cases. His files were organized chronologically, electronic equipment disconnected and packed properly. Even his scotch was recorked and added to the collection. By the time I finished, 8 perfectly packed suitcases and storage containers lined the foyer. Everything Daniel and Vanessa had brought into my house, ready for their removal. Nothing damaged, nothing destroyed, nothing missing. I had erased their presence without diminishing any possessions they could claim as their own. The final touch was a printed notice placed atop the luggage. Personal items ready for retrieval. Contact Harper, Chen, and Associates to arrange supervised collection. Any attempt to enter property without prior arrangement will be considered trespassing and prosecuted accordingly. As I completed this task, my phone buzzed with another news alert. Preston and Blackwell trading suspended. SEC cites irregular activities in managed accounts. Accompanying the headline was a stock photo of the firm's executive team from last year's annual report. Daniel stood at the edge of the group, smiling confidently in his bespoke suit, unaware that the image would now be used to illustrate his firm's downfall. I forwarded the alert to Meredith with a simple question. Impact. On timeline? Her response was immediate, proceeding as planned. 9 a.m. filing. Media already monitoring courthouse for financial crimes developments. Our filing will provide additional context they'll eagerly report. Perfect. The business press would be primed to connect Daniel's professional misconduct with his personal failures. The narrative would write itself. Senior investment executive under federal investigation, also accused of marital infidelity and attempted property theft. His credibility would be destroyed on all fronts simultaneously. I spent that night in my reclaimed home, sleeping in freshly made beds with new linens I'd brought with me. The security team remained stationed outside, ensuring no unexpected visits disturbed my first night back in my own space. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. At 8:45 a.m., Meredith texted, "En route to courthouse. Filing prepared with expedited. Processing request. At 9:12 a.m., filing complete. Court has assigned case number. Initial hearing date request submitted for earliest available slot." At 9:37 a.m., process server en route to Preston and Blackwell offices with divorce papers. Media alerted to significant development in ongoing financial investigation. I monitored these developments from my hospital office, maintaining my normal Monday schedule of department head meetings and financial reviews. To all outward appearances, I was simply the efficient, focused CFO everyone had come to rely on. No one would connect me to the breaking news story until I chose to reveal that connection. At 11:23 a.m., the text I'd been waiting for arrived from Meredith. Papers served. D received documents in front of colleagues and federal investigators. Maximum impact achieved. I could picture the scene perfectly. Daniel being handed legal documents while already under scrutiny from federal authorities, his professional mask cracking as he realized the papers outlined not just divorce proceedings, but detailed allegations of infidelity, financial misconduct, and false property claims. His colleagues watching his composure shatter, the federal investigators noting his emotional response for future reference. By noon, the story had broken across multiple financial news outlets. Preston and Blackwell executive served with divorce. Papers amid federal raid. One particularly thorough reporter had already connected the dots. Court records show investment director's wife owns property he claimed as marital asset. Daniel's professional and personal collapse was now public knowledge, his humiliation complete and documented, just as I had planned. My phone began ringing incessantly, calls from Daniel, from unknown numbers, likely reporters, from mutual acquaintances curious about the breaking story. I declined them all, maintaining my focus on hospital business, as if nothing unusual was occurring. Sarah appeared in my office doorway just after my last scheduled meeting, closing the door behind her. "It's everywhere," she said without preamble. "Every financial news outlet, local stations, even some national coverage because of the SEC angle. Daniel's face is all over the business channels." I nodded, unsurprised. "Has he attempted to contact you?" 3 calls in the past hour, Sarah confirmed. I didn't answer. Hospital counsel has no comment on the personal matters of employees' spouses. And the board? Abernathy called an emergency executive session for 3 p.m. They'll want reassurance that this won't impact hospital operations or the expansion project. I glanced at my watch. I'll prepare a statement addressing potential concerns. Sarah studied me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're remarkably calm for someone whose divorce has just become breaking news. This is merely the implementation phase of a plan that's been in development for months," I replied. "Everything is proceeding as anticipated." The hospital board meeting was brief and focused. I presented a concise overview of my personal situation, emphasizing that my financial holdings were entirely separate from Daniel's, that the house and all major assets were solely in my name, and that the divorce proceedings would not impact my professional responsibilities or the hospital's financial projects. The timing of these revelations is unfortunate but ultimately beneficial, I concluded. With everything now in the open, there will be no lingering questions or concerns that might distract from our work going forward. Dr. Abernathy voiced the board's unanimous support, noting that my characteristic foresight in keeping my financial affairs separate from Daniel's demonstrated the same prudence I brought to managing the hospital's resources. By the time I left the hospital that evening, 3 significant developments had occurred. First, Preston and Blackwell had announced the immediate suspension of 6 executives, including Daniel. Second, the SEC had filed formal charges against the firm for securities fraud, market manipulation, and fiduciary negligence. And third, Daniel had been photographed by news crews leaving the firm's offices with a cardboard box of personal items, the universal symbol of unceremonious termination. As I drove home, my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered through the car's Bluetooth system. Claire. Vanessa's voice, unexpectedly steady despite the circumstances. We need to talk. I believe my attorney has provided instructions for retrieving your personal items, I replied, maintaining the same professional tone I would use with a difficult vendor. This isn't about clothes or toiletries, she said, an edge creeping into her voice. This is about Daniel, about what you're doing to him. I allowed a moment of silence before responding. What I'm doing to him? Interesting perspective. He's being destroyed professionally because of your timing, Vanessa continued. You could have filed for divorce any time. You deliberately coordinated with the SEC investigation to maximize damage. An intriguing theory, I conceded, slowing for a red light, though it presumes I have influence over federal regulatory agencies. Don't play innocent, Vanessa snapped. I've worked in financial firms long enough to recognize a coordinated attack. You've been planning this for months. And you've been sleeping with my husband for months, I countered, my voice remaining calm. Perhaps longer. You're professional. Insights should have warned you about the risks of associating with someone like Daniel, personally and professionally. A pause, then. What do you want? Money? Some sort of revenge? What would it take to end this scorched earth campaign? Ty. Light turned green, and I accelerated smoothly. I already have what I want, Vanessa. My house, my assets, my reputation intact. Daniel's actions, professional and personal, have consequences. He's experiencing them now, as are you, by association. You cold, calculating bitch, she hissed. No, I corrected her. Methodical, strategic, forward-thinking, the qualities Daniel once claimed to value in me before he decided a younger, more compliant companion would better serve his ego. Another pause, longer this time. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had changed. Less confrontational, more calculating. What if I have information? Things Daniel told me about your finances, about the hospital's dealings, things that might interest certain investigators. Ah, there it was, the threat beneath the anger. I smiled slightly, though she couldn't see it. That would be ill-advised for 2 reasons, I replied. First, any financial insights Daniel shared with you were likely fabrications designed to impress you with his non-existent acumen. And second, false allegations to regulatory agencies are themselves prosecutable offenses, as I'm sure you're aware from your extensive experience in financial firms. I could almost hear her recalculating, trying to find leverage that didn't exist. Retrieval of your personal items can be arranged for tomorrow between 2 and 4 p.m., I continued. A representative from Harper, Chen & Associates will be present to supervise and document the process. If that time frame doesn't work for you, alternative arrangements can be discussed with my attorney. Good evening, Vanessa. I ended the call. Before she could respond, satisfied that another potential complication had been neutralized. Vanessa might be angry, but she was also strategic enough to recognize a losing position when she found herself in one. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sarah's car already parked by the curb. She was waiting on the front steps, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression that mixed concern with celebration. "I thought you might need company tonight," she explained as I approached. "The news coverage is intensifying. They've connected the divorce filing to the SEC investigation, and they're digging into Daniel's background, previous relationships, everything." I unlocked the door, disarming the security system with my fingerprint. "Was that your doing?" I asked, genuinely curious about the accelerated media interest. Sarah shook her head as we entered. "This is pure journalistic feeding frenzy. Financial scandal plus personal betrayal equals ratings gold. They're running with it without any encouragement needed." In the kitchen, I gathered glasses while Sarah opened the champagne. The quiet, domesticity of the moment contrasted sharply with the public storm surrounding Daniel's downfall. "Have you seen the footage?" Sarah asked, pouring the champagne. "Daniel being escorted from the building? It's all over the business channels." I shook my head. "I've been focused on hospital matters." Sarah pulled out her tablet and navigated to a news site. The video played automatically. Daniel emerging from the Preston and Blackwell building, jacket collar turned up against the cameras, ignoring reporters' shouted questions as he hurried toward a waiting taxi. His face was ashen, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. The cardboard box in his arms contained framed photos, a trophy from some investment competition, and what appeared to be his prized limited edition fountain pen collection. "They're saying he's facing potential criminal charges," Sarah commented, accepting the glass I offered her. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, possibly even RICO implications if they can prove he knew about the larger scheme." "And his attorney prospects?" I asked, dwindling by the hour. 3 more firms have declined to represent him since this morning. Apparently, no one wants to be associated with what they're calling the Preston and Blackwell Six. I raised my glass. In a small toast. "To consequences." Sarah clinked her glass against mine. "To meticulous planning." We settled in the living room, the house now fully reclaimed as my own space. Daniel and Vanessa's personal items were neatly packed and waiting in the foyer, a visual representation of their ejection from my life. "Vanessa called me on my way home," I mentioned casually. "She attempted to threaten me with supposed financial information Daniel shared with her." Sarah sat up straighter. "That's concerning." "What specifically?" "Nothing substantive," I assured her. "A desperate attempt to gain leverage." I reminded her that fabricating allegations to regulatory agencies carries its own legal risks. "Still," Sarah said, her legal mind already assessing potential threats, "we should document the call. It could constitute attempted extortion depending on the precise wording she used." I nodded in agreement. "I'll have the car's call recording." "System, download the audio file. Meredith should have it for her records." As the evening progressed, we discussed next steps, the initial divorce hearing scheduled for the following week, the media strategy for addressing inevitable questions, the security measures still in place to prevent any unauthorized visits. From Daniel. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You have no idea what's coming." DI showed the message to Sarah, who immediately took a screenshot. "Documented threat. I'll forward it to Meredith and the security team." "He's desperate," I observed. "His professional reputation destroyed, his personal life exposed, his financial resources dwindling. Desperation leads to mistakes." "Which is exactly what we anticipated," Sarah nodded. "Each reckless action or threat simply strengthens your position." By the time Sarah left, we had refined the strategy for the coming days, maintaining my professional composure at the hospital, documenting any contact attempts from Daniel or Vanessa, proceeding methodically with the divorce filing while the Preston and Blackwell investigation unfolded in parallel. Alone in my reclaimed house, I conducted one final walkthrough before retiring for the night. Every room now restored to my preferred order, every intrusion removed, every space reclaimed. The physical manifestation of the larger reclamation taking place in my life. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a final update from Meredith. Court date confirmed for next Monday. Judge Crawford assigned as anticipated. Dee has secured representation from Westmoreland Group, final firm willing to take his case. Limited resources, questionable strategy. I responded with a simple acknowledgement, then set my phone aside. Everything continued to unfold according to plan. Daniel scrambling to secure subpar legal representation, the divorce proceedings advancing on our preferred timeline, the media connecting all the unsavory elements of his professional and personal conduct. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new challenges to navigate. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own home, secure in the knowledge that Daniel's belated education about property deeds, financial independence, and the consequences of betrayal was proceeding exactly as designed. Morning arrived with new developments, some expected, some surprising in their timing, but not their substance. The first notification came from the security team. Dee attempted property access at 6:17 a.m., appeared intoxicated, verbal confrontation with security personnel, departed when police were mentioned, full report and video forthcoming. The second was a news alert. Preston and Blackwell managing director charged in federal probe, 6 others named as co-conspirators. Daniel's name appeared fourth on the list of those charged. The third was from Meredith. Emergency motion filed by Dee's new counsel requesting immediate access to marital property and assets. Hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Your presence requested but not required, Sarah called as I was reviewing these updates. Have you seen the morning news? They're calling it the biggest financial fraud case since Madoff. Daniel's facing up to 30 years if convicted on all counts. I've seen it, I confirmed, already mentally adjusting my schedule to accommodate the unexpected court hearing. More pressing is his attorney's emergency motion this afternoon. Standard desperate tactic, Sarah assessed. They'll claim he needs access to marital property for documents relevant to his defense. Judge Crawford won't be sympathetic, especially given the property deed and his documented infidelity. I'll attend nonetheless, I decided. Better to appear reasonable and cooperative with the court, even as we maintain our position. The morning proceeded with careful coordination, rescheduling hospital meetings, briefing Meredith on the latest developments, reviewing security footage of Daniel's early morning attempt to access the property. The video was particularly illuminating. Daniel, clearly intoxicated, arguing with the security personnel stationed discreetly in an unmarked car near the property. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes from yesterday, his normally perfect hair disheveled. The transformation from polished investment executive to desperate, intoxicated trespasser had occurred in less than 24 hours. More telling was his behavior, the wild gesticulations, the finger-pointing, the visible rage. At one point, he actually attempted to push past the security officer, only backing down when informed that police would be called immediately if he took one more step toward the house. I forwarded the video to Meredith with a note. Additional. Evidence of erratic behavior for this afternoon's hearing. Her response was immediate. Perfect timing. We'll incorporate into our response to emergency motion. By 1:30 p.m., I was seated beside Meredith in the county courthouse, reviewing our strategy for the emergency hearing. Daniel had not yet arrived, though his newly retained counsel, a junior partner from the Westmoreland Group, was frantically organizing documents at the opposite table. They're going to argue he needs immediate access to financial records stored at the house, Meredith explained quietly. Records supposedly crucial to his defense in the federal case. Records that don't exist, I noted. All our financial documentation is either with our accountant or in my secure cloud storage. Meredith nodded. Exactly. But they're desperate for any foothold. Any excuse to get him back into the house where he might claim partial residence rights. At 1:52 p.m., Daniel finally appeared, escorted by a different attorney than the one preparing, at the defense table. This second lawyer appeared to be briefing him rapidly as they approached, likely explaining procedures and limitations. The transformation in Daniel's appearance was stark even from yesterday's news footage. His bespoke suit hung awkwardly, as if he'd lost weight overnight. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his normally perfect grooming had given way to stubble and visible disarray. When he noticed me, he froze momentarily, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, anger, and something approaching fear before settling into forced composure. The younger attorney guided him to their table, whispering urgently as Daniel continued staring in my direction. I maintained a neutral expression, meeting his gaze briefly before returning my attention to the documents Meredith was reviewing. The message was clear. I was composed, prepared, and completely unmoved by his presence. Judge Crawford entered precisely at 2 p.m., and the bailiff called the court to order. The proceedings began with Daniel's counsel presenting their emergency motion, arguing that critical financial documents needed for his federal defense were located in the marital home, and that my sudden and unexplained reclaiming of the property constituted an attempt to withhold evidence relevant to his case. Meredith listened patiently, making occasional notes, but otherwise displaying complete confidence in our position. When it was her turn to respond, she approached the bench. With measured steps, "Your Honor, we're prepared to address each claim individually. But first, let me clarify several fundamental misrepresentations in opposing counsel's motion." She proceeded to systematically dismantle their arguments, presenting the property deed showing my sole ownership, documentation of Daniel's infidelity, including his moving another woman into my house, evidence that all relevant financial records were either with our accountant or in secure digital storage accessible to both parties, and finally, the security footage from that morning showing Daniel's intoxicated attempt to access the property. Far from withholding evidence, Meredith concluded, my client has simply secured her legal property from unauthorized access after documented intrusion. Mr. Keller's professional difficulties are entirely separate from this divorce proceeding, though his attempts to conflate them suggest a concerning pattern of misrepresentation. Judge Crawford, known for her no-nonsense approach, addressed Daniel's attorneys directly. Counselors, is there any evidence that documents exclusively related to Mr. Keller's federal case, not marital finances, not personal records, but specifically his defense against federal charges, are physically located in this property and nowhere else? The junior attorney glanced nervously at his senior colleague before responding. Your Honor, Mr. Keller believes certain documents and electronic records are stored there that would be beneficial to his defense. That wasn't my question, Judge, Crawford noted dryly. I asked for evidence that crucial defense materials exist exclusively in that location. We don't have specific inventory, Your Honor, but— Motion denied, Judge Crawford interrupted. The property is clearly in Ms. Keller's name only. Mr. Keller's unauthorized use of it to house his paramour, followed by his documented intoxicated attempt to access it this morning, demonstrates precisely why supervised access is appropriate. She turned to Meredith. Ms. Harper, your client has already arranged for the organized retrieval of Mr. Keller's personal belongings, correct? Yes, Your Honor. All personal items have been carefully packed and are available for supervised retrieval at scheduled times. Then that arrangement shall continue, Judge Crawford ruled. Mr. Keller may schedule supervised access to retrieve his belongings, but he may not reside in or freely access the property. Furthermore, this court will not entertain additional emergency motions without substantive new evidence. With a final bang of her gavel, the hearing concluded, a complete victory for our position. Daniel sat stunned at the defense table while his attorneys whispered urgently, likely explaining the implications of the ruling and attempting to develop an alternative strategy. As Meredith and I gathered our materials to leave, Daniel suddenly stood and approached our table, ignoring his attorney's attempts to restrain him. "Claire," he said, his voice pitched low but intense, "we need to talk. This has gone far enough. You've made your point." Meredith immediately stepped between us. "Mr. Keller, all communication should be through counsel. I suggest you return to your attorneys." "This is between me and my wife," Daniel insisted, attempting to move around Meredith. "Ex-wife," I corrected him calmly, meeting his gaze directly. "And Meredith is right. We have nothing to discuss outside of legal proceedings." Something in Daniel's expression shifted, the facade of control cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. "You don't understand what you're doing," he hissed. "The damage you're causing. To me, to my career, to my life." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I replied, maintaining the same calm tone. "Just as you understood exactly what you were doing when you moved your girlfriend into my house. When you depleted our joint accounts. When you lied about your firm's activities." His face flushed with anger. "You self-righteous—" "Mr. Keller," Judge Crawford's voice cut through the tension. She was still at the bench, observing the exchange. "I strongly advise you to step away and allow Ms. Keller and her counsel to depart. Any further attempts at unauthorized communication will be noted in the court record." Daniel's attorneys finally managed to pull him back, whispering urgently, as they guided him toward the exit. The defeated slump of his shoulders contrasted sharply with his attempted intimidation moments earlier, a visual representation of his rapidly diminishing power. As Meredith and I left the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid potential media, she remarked, "His behavior today only strengthens our case. Approaching you like that, attempting intimidation in front of the judge, it's the kind of impulsive action that destroys credibility." "It's also predictable," I noted. "Daniel has always reacted poorly to losing control. The more pressure applied, the more erratic his behavior becomes." "Which is exactly why your strategy has been so effective," Meredith acknowledged. "Each loss compounds the next, increasing his desperation, leading to further missteps." Back in my car, I checked my phone to find multiple updates waiting. The federal charges against Preston and Blackwell had expanded to include potential criminal conspiracy. Daniel's assets had been frozen as part of the investigation. And most significantly, a reporter had uncovered Vanessa's employment history at another firm previously investigated for similar violations. The narrative was evolving exactly as anticipated. Daniel's professional misconduct and personal betrayal merging into a single story of spectacular downfall. And I had orchestrated every aspect of it, from the timing of my disappearance to the reclaiming of my house, from the divorce filing to the court appearances. As I drove away from the courthouse, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Daniel had always underestimated me, my intelligence, my foresight, my capacity for strategic patience. Now he was learning the true cost of that miscalculation, one devastating revelation at a time. The next 2 weeks unfolded with the precision of a meticulously choreographed performance. Each day brought new developments in Daniel's professional and personal collapse, while I maintained my carefully crafted equilibrium. By Thursday morning, 7 days after the initial court hearing, the Preston and Blackwell scandal had expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. 3 senior partners had accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against the others. The SEC had frozen all executive assets pending further investigation, and Daniel's name appeared prominently in every article about the firm's fraudulent activities. "They're calling it a classic Ponzi scheme with a modern twist," Sarah explained during our weekly lunch. "Using client funds to cover trading losses, falsifying returns, creating shell accounts to hide the money flow. The federal prosecutor is comparing it to Madoff's operation, just on a smaller scale." I sipped my sparkling water, absorbing this information with practiced composure. And Daniel's specific involvement? According to the latest filings, he personally managed several of the fraudulent accounts. They have documentation showing he knew about the discrepancies for at least 18 months, coincidentally, around the time he began his affair with Vanessa. That timing wasn't coincidental, of course. Financial pressure and personal betrayal often moved in tandem, each feeding the other in a downward spiral of increasingly poor decisions. Speaking of Vanessa, Sarah continued, lowering her voice though we were seated in a private corner of the restaurant. Did you see this morning's business section? They've connected her to 3 different firms that faced regulatory action, always as an executive assistant to a director later charged with financial improprieties, always departing just before investigations became public. I hadn't seen the article, but the pattern aligned with my own research into Vanessa's employment history. They're suggesting she was somehow involved in the schemes? Sarah shrugged. Nothing that direct yet. But they're certainly implying she has a habit of forming relationships with executives engaged in questionable practices. Whether she's an accomplice or simply has terrible judgment in men remains unclear. The distinction wouldn't matter much for Vanessa's future employment prospects. Association with multiple financial scandals effectively ended careers in the investment world, regardless of personal culpability. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. Dee's attorney requesting settlement. Conference. Apparently, federal counsel advised resolving divorce quickly to focus on criminal defense. This development was earlier than anticipated, but not unwelcome. Daniel's legal resources were stretched thin between the criminal charges and divorce proceedings. Settling the latter would allow him to concentrate on the former, a practical decision his attorneys had likely been pushing for days. I responded simply, "What terms are they proposing?" Meredith's reply came moments later. "None yet. Floating the concept only. Shall I schedule preliminary discussion?" After brief consideration, I texted back, "Proceed, but maintain all current positions on property and assets." The strategic advantages of a settlement were considerable. A negotiated agreement would avoid protracted court battles, prevent any unexpected judicial rulings, and most importantly, provide a clean, definitive end to my connection with Daniel. The criminal proceedings against him might drag on for years, but our divorce could be finalized and behind me in a matter of weeks. "Good news?" Sarah asked, noting my slight smile. "Potentially." Daniel's counsel is requesting settlement discussions. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That was faster than we projected. His resources must be even more limited than we thought. "The federal case takes precedence," I noted. "His attorneys are likely advising him to simplify where possible. And will you agree to settlement talks?" "Of course. A clean resolution benefits me as much as him, provided the terms reflect reality. Reality being that I owned the house outright, that my financial assets were properly segregated from his, and that his infidelity and financial misconduct had been thoroughly documented. Any reasonable settlement would acknowledge these facts rather than contest them." As lunch concluded, I received another text from Meredith. "Meeting scheduled for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Dee will not attend personally. Counsel only." Perfect. Negotiating. With attorneys rather than Daniel directly would keep emotions removed from the proceedings, allowing for more efficient resolution. The fact that Daniel wouldn't be present suggested his lawyers had recognized his volatility as a liability in negotiations. The rest of the day proceeded according to my carefully maintained schedule. Hospital budget meetings, review of the expansion project timelines, routine administrative tasks that anchored my professional identity regardless of personal circumstances. By evening, another significant development had emerged. The business press had uncovered connections between specific fraudulent accounts at Preston and Blackwell and offshore entities linked to Daniel personally. The implications were damning, not just professional misconduct within the firm, but potential personal enrichment through deliberately deceptive practices, Meredith called as I was reviewing these reports. Have you seen the latest? Just reading. It now, I confirmed. This changes our settlement approach, she noted. If these offshore accounts are verified, they would constitute hidden assets subject to discovery in divorce proceedings. Unless we agree not to pursue them as part of a settlement, I pointed out. Meredith paused, then chuckled softly. And this is why you're my favorite client. Yes, exactly. We now have additional leverage for tomorrow's discussion. How would you suggest we proceed? Let them make the initial offer, Meredith advised. I suspect it will be surprisingly generous given these new revelations. They'll want to avoid any additional financial scrutiny from our forensic accountants, which could potentially uncover evidence relevant to the criminal case. The strategy was sound. By allowing Daniel's counsel to establish initial terms, we would gain insight into what they were most concerned about protecting or concealing. That information itself had value beyond any specific dollar amount they might propose. The settlement conference the following morning validated this approach entirely. Daniel's attorneys, now expanded to include a specialist in white-collar criminal defense, proposed terms that were indeed surprisingly favorable. They conceded full ownership of the house, which was already legally mine, acknowledged the separation of financial assets, and even offered a substantial cash settlement to expedite proceedings and provide closure for both parties. This last element was particularly telling. Daniel had no legal obligation to provide additional funds beyond returning any marital assets he might have appropriated. A voluntary cash settlement suggested strongly that his legal team feared what further financial investigation might uncover. Meredith received their proposal with professional neutrality, promising to review the terms with me and respond within 48 hours. As soon as we were alone in her office, however, her poker face gave way to a satisfied smile. They're terrified of financial discovery, she observed, highlighting specific clauses in the settlement agreement. These waivers of further accounting, the expedited timeline, the non-disclosure provisions, all designed to prevent our forensic accountants from examining his finances further. I reviewed the document carefully, noting the generous terms alongside the restrictive clauses. The cash settlement is significantly higher than we anticipated. Blood money, Meredith said bluntly. They're hoping you'll take it and walk away, without asking questions about where it came from or what else might be hidden. And if we countered by demanding full financial disclosure instead of accepting the settlement? Meredith leaned back in her chair, considering. It would delay the divorce proceedings potentially by months. Any information we uncovered would likely be shared with federal prosecutors through discovery requirements. Daniel's criminal exposure would increase significantly. I weighed these options carefully. The settlement offered immediate closure and substantial financial compensation. Further investigation promised potential satisfaction in seeing Daniel face additional consequences, but at the cost of prolonging my own connection to him and his misdeeds. Draft a counteroffer, I decided. Accept the general framework but increase the settlement amount by 30%. Add provisions for retrieval of any remaining personal items from the house, and include strict non-contact requirements going forward. Meredith nodded approvingly. They'll accept. The additional amount is significant but not prohibitive, and the non-contact provisions benefit Daniel as much as you at this point. She was right. By that evening, Daniel's counsel had agreed to our counteroffer with minimal negotiation. The final settlement included the increased financial compensation, comprehensive non-contact provisions, and an expedited timeline for finalizing all documentation. The divorce would be complete within 10 days, assuming the judge approved the settlement terms, which Meredith assured me was virtually certain given the circumstances and Judge Crawford's previous rulings. As I left Meredith's office that evening, a notification appeared on my phone. A news alert with Daniel's name in. The headline, Preston and Blackwell executive released on $2 million bail. Passport surrendered. The attached article included a courthouse photograph of Daniel leaving his bail hearing. The transformation was shocking even to me. In just 2 weeks, he had aged a decade. The polished, confident investment director had been replaced by a haggard, defeated figure in an ill-fitting suit. Photographers captured him shielding his face from cameras, shoulders hunched, escorted by grim-faced attorneys on either side. Most telling was the complete absence of Vanessa in any recent coverage. According to Sarah's sources, she had left the city 3 days ago, her destination unknown. Whether she had abandoned Daniel to his fate or been advised to distance herself from the case remained unclear. Either way, his personal and professional support systems had evaporated simultaneously. The following week passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and final arrangements. The divorce settlement was submitted to the court, reviewed by Judge Crawford, and approved with remarkable efficiency. Daniel's attorneys pushed for immediate processing, likely under instruction to resolve the divorce before additional criminal charges might complicate matters further. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Meredith called with the news I had been waiting for. "It's done. The judge signed the final decree this morning. You are officially divorced." The words landed with surprising gentleness, not the dramatic climax one might expect after months of strategic planning, but rather the quiet conclusion of a necessary business transaction. "Thank you," I said simply, "for everything." "My pleasure," Meredith replied, professional but warm. "The final settlement has been transferred to your account. The deed to the house has been re-registered with additional notations confirming sole ownership. All legal notifications have been sent to relevant parties." "And the non-contact provisions?" "In full effect immediately. Any attempt by Daniel to contact you directly would constitute violation of a court order, potentially resulting in additional legal consequences." Another loose end neatly tied. Daniel would not be appearing on my doorstep or calling my phone in desperate attempts to negotiate or manipulate. The legal barriers were now as firm as the emotional ones I had constructed months ago. That evening, Sarah arrived at my house with an expensive bottle of champagne and a small, elegantly wrapped package. "To commemorate the occasion," she explained as I welcomed her inside. We settled in the living room, now redecorated to my personal preferences, rather than the compromise style that had characterized my marriage to Daniel. The new furniture, artwork, and color scheme reflected my aesthetic completely. No concessions, no accommodations for anyone else's taste. Sarah raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, clean breaks, and bulletproof property deeds." Smiled, clinking my glass against hers. "And to thorough preparation." "Open your gift," she urged after we had each sipped the excellent champagne. The small package contained a beautiful silver paperweight, elegantly engraved with a single word: "Prevail." "It seemed fitting," Sarah explained. "Not just surviving, but prevailing. Coming through stronger than before." I turned the paperweight in my hand, appreciating both the sentiment and the craftsmanship. "It's perfect. Thank you." As we enjoyed the champagne, Sarah updated me on the latest developments in Daniel's case. 3 more executives had accepted plea deals, each implicating him in increasingly serious violations. His bail conditions had been tightened after prosecutors expressed concern about potential flight risk, and the offshore accounts connected to him were now under scrutiny by international financial crime units. "They're projecting a minimum 10-year sentence if he's convicted on all counts," Sarah noted. "Possibly more depending on what the offshore investigation uncovers." I absorbed this information with the same cool detachment I'd maintained throughout the process. Daniel's fate was no longer connected to mine in any way. His choices had led him to this point, just as my choices had led me to mine. "And professionally?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "The hospital board remains supportive?" "More than supportive," I confirmed. "The expansion project is proceeding ahead of schedule. My quarterly performance review was exemplary. and Dr. Abernathy has hinted at potential advancement opportunities in the coming year. My professional success continued uninterrupted, perhaps even enhanced by the contrast between my composed handling of personal challenges and Daniel's spectacular implosion. Where his career lay in ruins, mine continued its steady upward trajectory, built on the solid foundation of competence rather than deception. After Sarah departed, I moved through my reclaimed home with a sense of peaceful completion. Each room now reflected only my preferences, my choices, my vision. No traces of Daniel remained. All his belongings had been removed, all evidence of his temporary occupation erased. In my home office, I opened the secure file I had maintained throughout. This process, a detailed documentation of Daniel's betrayal, my strategic response, and the ultimate resolution. The final entry would be made tonight, closing this chapter permanently. As I typed the concluding notes, a news alert appeared on my computer screen. Federal prosecutors expand Preston and Blackwell case. New evidence suggests international money laundering. Daniel's world continued to collapse, the consequences of his actions multiplying beyond even my careful projections. But that story was no longer connected to mine. I had extricated myself completely, protecting what was mine while allowing him to face the natural repercussions of his choices. I completed my final entry, saved the file, and closed the document. Then I activated the secure deletion protocol we had established months ago, systematically removing all traces of my documentation from any potentially discoverable source. The record of my strategy existed now only in encrypted backups accessible solely to me, insurance against any future attempts to rewrite this history. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my executive office on the top floor of the hospital's new wing, the expansion project I had spearheaded now completed ahead of schedule and under budget. My promotion to Chief Executive Officer had been announced the previous month, culminating years of strategic career advancement. The morning's business news had included a small item about Daniel's sentencing, 15 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, and restitution payments that would extend well beyond his release. Vanessa had reportedly testified against him as part of her own immunity agreement, revealing that their relationship had begun not as a romantic connection, but as a strategic partnership to conceal financial misconduct. I felt no satisfaction in this news, no vindictive pleasure in Daniel's downfall. Those emotions had burned away long ago, replaced by the cool clarity that had guided me through each phase of my response to his betrayal. What remained was simply recognition of natural consequences. His actions had produced precisely the results that should have been expected. My assistant knocked lightly on the open door. "Your 10 o'clock is here, Ms. Keller, the investment committee for the new oncology center." "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there." I gathered my presentation materials and took one last look at the view from my window, the city spread out below, opportunities extending in every direction. My house remained my sanctuary, my career continued its ascent, and my life proceeded on the path I had carefully constructed. Daniel had moved his girlfriend into my house, never bothering to read the deed that would have revealed his vulnerability. That single act of carelessness, born of arrogance, entitlement, and underestimation, had set in motion the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed facade. I closed my office door and headed toward the conference room, my steps measured and confident. The past was properly archived, its lessons incorporated, but its hold released. Ahead lay possibilities limited only by my vision and determination, a future built on the solid foundation of knowing exactly what I owned, what I was worth, and what I was capable of achieving. Daniel had learned those facts too late. I had known them all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.